What's your best you had one job story? When my son was 3 weeks old, my husband and I were really broke and didn't have a dishwasher, so we used to sterilize the baby bottles by throwing them in a pot and boiling them with water. A few days before the event I'm about to recount, my sister-in-law, who was 14, was asked to keep an eye on the pacifiers as they boiled in the pot while she was watching TV upstairs. Of course, she forgot to turn off the stove, and after 5 minutes, the water evaporated and melted the pacifiers to crap. So, my husband tore her a new a-hole about ruining what little we could afford. Blah, blah, blah. Fast forward a few days later, I'm downstairs trying to put the baby down for a nap, while my husband was upstairs playing video games, watching the pot boil for 5 minutes. Lo and behold, he had headphones on and fell asleep listening to music. I was asleep with the baby downstairs, and the smell of smoke is what woke me up. Big clouds were creeping underneath our bedroom door, so I jumped out of bed, walked out of my bedroom, and was greeted with a dense fog of smoke. I immediately ran upstairs where I saw flames licking the roof of the kitchen coming from the stove. I slapped my husband's face several times to wake him up. He immediately freaked out and grabbed the fire extinguisher, while I ran back downstairs, covered the baby up in my jacket, and ran outside to the below-freezing temperatures of a Canadian winter. I freaked out and never let him live down the fact that he burned down half of our kitchen when we had been married less than a year. He had one job, story 2. In 9th grade, we had a physics project where we had to make a book about the physical possibilities of some concepts in a science fiction book. I naturally chose Hitchhiker's Guide. We were assigned a group, and everyone in my group was pretty cool. I, being a leader, divided up what we would do for the project, and we all agreed. When it came down to crunch time, we needed a simple cover with the title and our names. Note, our physics teacher had a strict rule about names on papers. No name, no grade. And it had to be printed too. So it was the morning this big project was due, and one of my group members said he had research next and he would do the cover in that class. We get to physics, and he didn't have it done. The rest of us flipped out. It was a 200-point assignment, and he had a 1-hour class with full computer and printer access. We tried to convince our teacher to let us print one in his classroom, and he said no. Long, not really, story short. Puppy dog eyes worked, and we got until the end of the day to do it. But he had one job, gave the other 4 of us serious stress. So, what's your best one-job story that someone did to you, or maybe you did to someone else? Edit. Well, this solidified my knowledge that school will make you lose faith in your generation. I also feel a little better about the kid that did it to me. Judging by you guys, it could have been way worse. Story 3. Oh Lord, I have one for this. I played drums in high school band class, and there was this absolutely hopeless druggy kid in the percussion section. He was worthless and would usually just stand around in the back and hope nobody noticed him. One concert, the kid's entire musical challenge was a one-note gong solo, as in the entire band went completely silent long enough for this kid to hit the gong, and then the song continued. The director spent probably 10 minutes of the entire group's pre-concert rehearsal time just working on this gong hit, and he messed it up. There was a crescendo, an awkward silence, and then a gong, hit about 3 seconds after the band started playing again. Story 4. I'm a stagehand. A guy I used to work with is famously useless. So useless, in fact, that one night he was actively impeding our attempts to get the show packed up and out the door. Fed up, the person in charge of our group told him, "Right, your job from now until the end of the night is to stand here, put your hands on this box, and don't move until I come and get you. Just stay here with the box." Needless to say, about half an hour later, useless guy wandered up, having taken the box out to the wrong truck without having been told. We had to unpack half of a semi-trailer to get the frigging box out so it could go where it was supposed to. You had one job, Jack, eh? Story 5. I did a project worth approximately 25% of our grade. 3-person group. I knew one of the guys was a total jerk and wouldn't do anything. I intentionally gave him the simplest, shortest part, which he couldn't possibly mess up. How did he manage to mess it up? He just didn't do any of it, and spent the 5 minutes of prep time before the presentation skimming the chapter. My professor was shocked and disgusted by the presentation because it was such a mess. My delinquent partner actually spent 10 minutes rambling about nothing, which made it that much worse. 5 hours of working on the project to fix it and presenting it myself to the professor earned me an A in the course. Story 6. Capstone project in college on a large team making an electric race car. I was the electrical lead and had 2 other proficient electrical team members and 2 other not-so-proficient electrical team members. So, while 3 of us designed and built the drivetrain of a prototype race car, I left the other 2 to do the report. They emailed it to me about a week out from hand it in now or you fail time. And it was corrupt and would not open no matter what I did. Somehow, neither of them had a backup, meaning they probably just renamed an MP3 to a doc instead of doing the report. So the other three of us had to throw together a final capstone report in a week. It ended up being over 100 pages. Story 7. I used to do run crew for my high school's drama club. One day during rehearsal, the chief of the crew left for the day and put me in charge. Each person on the crew had a series of tasks they had to perform each night. Keep in mind, said tasks were things like bring out a table or take off pillows. There was one kid on the crew who was so hopeless that we gave him one job for the entire show, to bring out the bed during one of the scenes. We get to the point where he has to bring it out. His cue was both a line from an actor and an extremely loud crash in the music. He missed it 3 times in one day. The last of the 3, the music stops, and all you could hear for miles was the director screaming, the bed, you idiot, the bed." I flipped one too many shits on him that day. Story 8. When I was a senior in high school, I was stopping by my house to pick up Smash Bros. Before heading over to a friend's house. I literally walked inside, picked up the game, and left. When I arrived at my friend's, the game was nowhere to be found. Somehow, between me picking the game up and getting in my car, I managed to forget that I was holding onto something and dropped it on the floor. Story 9. So for my dual credit English course my senior year, we, as a group, had to teach definition arguments to the class. I researched the book, made the PowerPoint, and created fill-in-the-blank notes to pass out to the class, while 2 other girls took my PowerPoint and made it super fancy looking. We had this third girl whose only job was to create an activity, like a game or crossword puzzle or something, and present it to the class. Usually, groups always bring candy or sweets to give out to people who do well in the activities. First people done, first to answer, etc. Keep in mind, this girl had 3 weeks to come up with a game, and he frigging walks in with a bag of Doritos. Not even cups to put them in, or anything. She was just going to hand them out while playing hangman with the words on the notes, stumbling with spelling the entire time. It was obvious she put no effort into it and made all of us look like idiots. So she would just stand there, filling in letters, and chunk Doritos at people. Story 10. A fellow reenactor and I were tasked with laying down some explosive charges for a battle. They were supposed to be connected to a network of cables that all led to a central location and would be detonated remotely depending on how the battle went. Now here comes the really important part. I told this individual that the switch for the battery was not working properly. So, under no circumstances should he connect it to the battery until I was done laying down line. Well, foreshadowing aside, the idiot went ahead and connected the main wire to the battery, causing the entire network of explosives to go off simultaneously. The kicker of my little story is that when those charges went off, I was still putting one into the ground. It ended up taking out my eyebrows and half my damn uniform. I was mad enough to try and kick his A up and down the beach. However, I decided to act chill and just get drunk with him instead. No harm, no foul. Story 11. In my teens, my oldest brother was living with my folks and me. He never cleaned anything around my parents' home, and after this story, now I know why. He was asked to scrub the toilet. He did it and used the same rags we bathe with to do so. The toilet brush was in plain sight. When asked why he would do such a thing, his response was, "You use them to scrub your A anyways." 4 perfectly good washcloths went straight in the trash. Story 12. I was the director while making a short student film last semester. All my classmate had to do was stand with the camera on a tripod while I went to gather people who were willing to answer a simple question. But no. He took it off the tripod and followed me around, acting like he was Steven Spielberg or some crap. He forgot to press rec half of the time. He screwed the whole thing up, but luckily my friend and I fixed it enough in editing, and our lecturer liked it, so we passed. Incompetence with the simplest task annoys me. Story 13. As a freshman in high school, I was a drummer in marching band. Every year, the band went to a festival about 3 hours away from the school to march in a long parade in a beautiful mountain town. It was quite an endeavor. It took 4 coach buses, countless travel cases, and many parent volunteers. The formation went thusly: drum majors, the people with the giant batons, then the poms, the marching version of cheerleaders, then the band, then the color guard with flags. This year was notable because the color guard forgot to pack their flags. The band director, a notorious drunk, dropped plenty of F-bombs, but the color guard still marched with us. There was simply no replacement for the missing flags, so they tried mimicking the movements they would have done with them. The judges were less than impressed. Story 14. I worked at a retail store in high school part-time. I had only worked there for about a year, but they gave me a key and supervisor-like duties. One night, I was supposed to close up, and I was working with another student who was younger than I was. I'll call him Greg because that was his name. I'd been working since noon, and he came in at 5. The store closed at 9. Instead of eating dinner at 4:30, I figured I'd wait until Greg showed up. Before the manager left for the night, she gave me a list of things to do. All but one of them were in-store jobs, and one was counting inventory in the basement stockroom. Not all the inventory, just one product. It took about 15 minutes. I sent Greg down immediately after he showed up. A good 30 minutes went by and he wasn't back yet. I called the stockroom number and he didn't answer. I couldn't leave the floor to go find him, so I just waited. About 2 hours later, he came back into the store. I didn't see him leave, and I gave him a "what the hell" look. He said, "I just took a quick break. I'm still counting." He ended up showing back up on the floor 10 minutes before closing. I was mad pissed that I didn't get a chance to eat, and I forgot to even ask him why he didn't answer the phone when I called. A few weeks later, I heard him tell a different coworker, for a different issue, that he didn't think he was supposed to answer the stockroom phone. Anyway, the next day I came in, and, to my surprise, no one had filled out an inventory sheet from the night before. He claimed he just thought he was supposed to count them in his head. I asked him what the number was so I could fill out the sheet, and he said he forgot since it was the night before. I just about set him on fire with my mind. Story 15. I was in chem lab in high school, and we were supposed to observe a few different chemical reactions and note when the chemicals changed colors. My lab partner and I missed the first of these color changes, so I told him to watch the test tubes while I redid the first reaction. When I came back, all the other reactions were finished, and my lab partner was away from the table. I asked him when they had changed color, and he told me he was talking to our teacher. I started screaming at him for like 2 straight minutes, but I do not even remember being upset about it. Story 16. I remember working out in the yard with my father and my brother. Me and my dad are naturally farm boy strong, something my brother did not inherit. So when me and my dad were lifting this really heavy, awkward furnace into the back of his trailer, my brother's job was simply to stand on the other end so it did not slide or turn or anything. Me and my dad lift, and whoops, the other end slides out, and we end up dropping our end, nearly breaking my dad's toes and severely denting my steel toes. Turns out my brother got a text, so he sat down to send it. He literally had one job, and that was to stand in one place. Shakes head. Story 17. Once, in a humanities class in college, we had a group project to make a reenactment of a scene from Hamlet and write an analysis of that scene. We divided the workload into me playing Hamlet, one girl as the queen, 2 as gravediggers, relatively simple lines and parts, and 1 as Horatio. The remaining member was supposed to write the analysis because she was not comfortable with the Elizabethan dialect. We set a date to film and all took off work and class to do it, except one of the gravediggers who said she might not make it because she had work study. We called her the day of, and now she had class and might be able to make the meeting late. She never called again, so we had to make the girl who was not comfortable with the vernacular play the gravedigger. She did a fantastic job, so we called the one who did not show and told her she was completely responsible for the analysis. Note, there was an intensive outline online that gave very simple, easy-to-follow guidelines for the analysis. Long story short, she shows up the day of and has not finished it. And she starts making a PowerPoint while other groups are presenting. We told her when she first got the assignment that she had 5 minutes because the film was 15 minutes, and we had 20 total minutes for the presentation. The film finishes, and everyone really enjoyed it. Then she gets up and starts her analysis, which does not follow the guidelines whatsoever, and takes 15 extra minutes to present it while there is an incredibly awkward silence totaling 30 minutes for the full presentation. Fortunately, we had to give a peer review, and we gave her the worst review we could. We all got 98s, while she probably got a D-Day saved by peer reviews and fair professors. Story 18. I had a deadbeat mandatory homework partner in a computer programming class. I did every assignment by myself after listening to every excuse in the book for why he could not help. One week I unexpectedly had to go to Seattle for a few days for a job interview. I rushed to get all my work done ahead of time, but did not have time to do one really trivial part of our coding project that was due on Friday. It was something tedious and mindless that should have taken him 20 to 30 minutes. I left him with the explicit request that he finish the assignment and turn it in on Friday. The night before it was due, I got back to my hotel after grueling interviews all day and found about 15 text messages explaining how he did not think he was interpreting the instructions correctly, how the assignment was a ridiculous amount of work, and how he was willing to let this slide as a bad homework score. He also called me 4 times, totaling $20 in charges because my cell phone was roaming. So instead of touring Seattle with the other interviewees, I stayed in the hotel room and finished the project. It took me a long time because I did not have the textbook as a reference, and the entire time my partner was texting me to hurry up because of the time zone difference. Later, he apologized and offered to buy me a McDonald's hamburger for my efforts. Story 19. It seems like group projects in school are designed to punish the smartest and hardest working students. I guess sooner or later you need to learn how to work with people who suck, but man, I got sick of getting the raw end of the deal in college. The worst was the time I had to give a 30-minute presentation with a partner. I forget the topic, but it was something related to molecular biology, so there was very little room for nonsense. My partner and I split up the topic. I worked on my portion diligently for days leading up to it, while he insisted he would take care of his part, but dodged all of my calls and emails. On the morning of the presentation, I still had not heard from him, so I threw together a few PowerPoint slides just in case, so I would not be completely screwed if he had prepared nothing. He showed up to class 5 minutes before we presented, looked at my slides, and said, "Oh, that's better than what I had," and when it was his turn, he just read directly off the slides. I was literally shaking with rage. Story 20. I wanted a job when I was 15 that didn't involve delivering newspapers, so I had to get a special work permit for people under 16. So after that, I got a job at Papa Gino's, which is a chain pizza, Italian fast food restaurant. They put me on as a dishwasher. I was sorely inexperienced as a dishwasher, though, so after about 3 weeks or so, my boss walked up to me as I was washing dishes and said, "What are you doing?" I replied, "Oh, just washing dishes." She asked, "Where is the soap?" It quickly dawned on me that up until then, I just never really had thought to use soap. I just scrubbed the dishes with a sponge and rag in hot water. Incredibly stupid, I know. I still can't figure out how I was that dumb. Story 21. I had started a new job at GameStop. About 2 weeks in, I had to print some labels for games to be put on the shelf. You know, the yellow used stickers that cover up the entire frigging case. Well, in the process of doing so, you have to hit like 20 different keys, and then you scan the barcode of the game, and it prints the labels. I had gotten used to the pattern of this, but I was getting careless. At the time, you could manually put in how many labels you wanted to print, and by mistake, I had that screen up and scanned the barcode, which had some number like 952,000, resulting in the computer printing that many labels. I was like, crap. Now it seemed the problem could have easily been solved by exiting the printer screen, but it didn't. Then we thought turning the printer off and back on might stop it, but it didn't. We thought turning the computer off that had scanned it in would stop it, but it didn't. Nope, we had to shut the entire frigging system down to get the label printer to stop printing labels, meaning we couldn't ring anyone up, couldn't do crap. Not to mention, starting up the computers is like preheating the oven. It takes forever. I was so embarrassed. I screwed up for the day. I learned a good lesson that day, though, especially about not being careless when using the computers at GS. Story 22. Closing seconds of the game. We're up, but it's 4th down, so we need to punt. Coach tells me to kick it out of bounds or anywhere, other than toward this super athletic returner on the other team. Snap's good, and I get off the kick. Wouldn't you know it? The ball went right to the very guy I was supposed to keep it away from. He did what Coach feared and ran the ball all the way back for the score, and we lost. Boy, was Coach mad after that one. Story 23. We were going to a convention in NYC from KY, and our friend said he could rent a decent van for all 6 of us. We were supposed to leave on Thursday night, and the guy said he had our van at the beginning of that week. So Friday rolls around, and it turns out the D-head didn't have a car at all and ended up getting a Nissan Versa. We rode 16 hours to NYC and back, 6 of us, in a Nissan Versa. It was terrible. Story 24. When I was a freshman in high school, I got a job answering phones, taking payments, and shredding paper, etc. at a local insurance agency. I came in after school one day and took maybe 3 or 4 people's payments. And I forgot to put them in the money drawer like I was supposed to, so they ended up in my shredding pile. I also got my first paycheck that day. Everything got shredded. Story 25. Freshman year in high school. I let my friend, who loses everything he touches, borrow my copy of The Odyssey for one frigging class, and I go up to him in the hallway, ask him for my book, and I got a... What? The thing was, I wouldn't have let him borrow it, but he had an in-class essay to write, so I felt bad for the kid. I put so much emphasis on him not losing it, and when I learned he lost my father's 1950s copy of the book, I straight up punched him. Story 26. I was a volunteer worker in a local brewery, worked in bottling. I was paid in beer and was encouraged to drink while working. Sweet gig. There was a line manager, and he told me all I had to do was watch the bottles go by and make sure 1, they had enough beer in them, and 2, that the tops of the bottles were capped and not broken. Things are going great. Any beer that was low was promptly removed and drunk. However, when the manager's back was turned to hit on another lady volunteer, the machine goes haywire. All the beer bottles are jagged edges on top. I thrust my arm out to stop all the bottles, and I'm screaming at the guy, but he can't hear me because the machine is so loud. He finally turns around to see me holding back the line as bottles are crashing all over the place. I hold only one job. Story 27, marketing project. A guy in my group had one frigging job to do in 4 weeks because we all knew he was lazy. He was supposed to send an email with questions we had made in the group to a store that sold video games and write down the basics of the response he got. 4 weeks later, he had not done it, even with being reminded several times. It wasn't that big of a deal, really, but come on, it's an email. It would take you all of 1 minute to friggin' do it. Story 28. One time I worked in a retail store in a mall, and there was a flood in the store above us that shorted out the electrical outlet that was used for a server-esque machine in our store that controlled the lights, internet, and phones. After several hours of being on the phone with the mall's super and our store's headquarters, I had to basically reroute all cords to a power strip that then connected to an extension cord that plugged into an outlet in another location in the store. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it meant the phones, computers, and lights would all work. I go home and leave a very detailed note stating, plug the extension cord back in to turn everything on in the morning. That's all the opening manager had to do. I come in the next day at 1 o'clock to a dark store with no working telephones. There was not one but 2 managers on staff, yet neither one plugged the extension cord back in. Of course I did so, and not long after our district manager calls, saying he was getting complaints all morning that our store wasn't answering the phone. Story 29. This has happened to me repeatedly, and I just don't understand it. I lived in a major U.S. city and moved to different apartments often. I would always draft one friend to just stand by the truck and make sure no one stole my crap. That's it. You don't need to pick up a single item. It's a huge help to me because I don't have to secure the vehicle every time I drop something off and return to the 3rd floor apartment. Just stand here. I'll bring you drinks. I'll bring you a seat. I'll bring you anything you need. Every frigging time I'm picking up a box in my living room, turn around and said, friend is standing behind me saying, hey, is there anything I can carry? Who's watching the truck? No one. I run down and more than once found dudes in the alley heading straight for the open truck. They saw me come down, laughed, and turned around. Story 30. So I asked my friend Carl if he could help me out with some business. Long story short, I need him to drive me to meet up with some associates. He agrees, and we're ready to go. Anyway, we get on his bike, Carl was driving, and start toward our destination. Eventually, I see my associates in another vehicle, so I pull out my gun and start shooting at them. Carl is weaving all over the place at this point, losing control of his bike. I manage to shoot 2 of them before Carl gets stuck, and we lose the vehicle that we were following. I get really mad at Carl, look him right in the eye, and shout, all you had to do was follow the damn train, CJ. Story 31. We had a group project in freshman year of high school that involved making a newspaper from events of World War II. Out of the 4, my friend, another guy, and I did all the work. The last one was in charge of saving the collective work onto a USB drive and just bringing it in. I asked for the drive 2 days before the project was due. She said her dad had it and she'd give it to me tomorrow. Next day, she pretends to rummage through her bag and panic, claiming it must have gotten stolen. I called BS and told her to email me the project at 7 p.m. She never did. I was up until 12 a.m., working on it, slept until 5 a.m., worked on some more, got to school at 6:50-ish, and worked on it until the very last minute. I had my copy, and she came in with her own horrible copy. She said we'd use mine since it's nicer. Upon closer inspection, her copy was filled with pure BS. We got a 94, though, but damn, all she had to do was bring in her damn USB drive. Story 32. In a 5-person group in an 80-person class, I got the 2 worst people possible assigned to work with me for the entire semester. One was some obscenely rich kid from Dubai who had wrangled his way into a class he had none of the prerequisites for. He erroneously believed he'd be graduating from our engineering program in 3 years and was convinced that every single one of our teachers were idiots. The other had a rat tail, commented on something the professor said every 2 minutes, and was hopelessly divorced from reality. He'd spent the last 5 years constructing Mjolnir armor, the armor from Halo, and insisted we consider integrating repulsor technology into our design. We tried including them, at first as equals, then explaining why we were giving them less responsibility, and by the time our final presentation rolled around, we convinced them they'd already made the greatest contributions to the project, and we would do everything that was left, as they would be out of the loop for the final run. We asked that the 3 of us who had our crap together be the only ones presenting, and they agreed. They had one task: do nothing. They interrupted us constantly during the final presentation. With corrections we had to immediately refute. Fortunately, the teachers knew they were idiots and opted not to give us all the same grade. Story 33. 10th grade, I had a group assignment where we had to do a tabloid based off the Count of Monte Cristo. It was a great book. And the project wasn't insanely hard, but my group members were terrible. I ended up writing 80% of it and formatting the entire tabloid. I give it to the guy who did the least work and tell him to print it, because that's all he committed to doing 4 days before the deadline. The night before it was due at 12:40 a.m., he messages me saying his printer was broken. I had to get my dad to take me to Kinko's at 1 a.m. The a-hole didn't even pay me his share. Story 34. Me and a few buddies were invited by my father's friends for a LAN party. We would play TF2, CSS, Unreal, all that jazz. Requirements were computer, screen, keyboard, mouse, and a power bar. The host said that Ethernet cables would not be an issue at all. I brought my own just in case. So we packed up our stuff and headed over. Turns out the party was okay. TF2 was played. Vanilla, since the only members who actually had the game were me and my friends. Unreal was played. CSS was not played due to lack of planning with the whole pirated games issue. That didn't bother me as much as the lack of Ethernet cables we were supposed to be given. We were sat in a room with no internet connection. So we then were told to use our phones for the internet. I don't even have data. So then we were going to tether one guy's phone for internet. As one would assume, that still wouldn't work without Ethernet cables. Then later, the guy in charge of the Ethernet cables found a collection of Ethernet cables in his car. What? Okay. We untangled them, just to find it was one big cable in a huge knot. So then one good party member decided to go home and grab tons of cables and come back. He was not the member in charge of the cables in the first place. Story 35. Our capstone was entirely based on one extensive project that took up every waking second of our days. There were 4 groups in the class assigned by the instructor. There was one girl in the class nobody wanted to work with because she was useless. Luckily, she wasn't on my team, but ended up on my friends. Anyway, as predicted, she didn't do a damn thing. She rarely showed up to meetings. She never followed through. She even once said she would turn in receipts and expenses. The day came, and not only did she not show up to class, but she didn't answer her phone, causing the team members to not be reimbursed by the professor. The week our final project was due, my friend cut her a deal that if she took care of printing, the rest of the group would make sure she didn't fail. It had become obvious to even the professor that she was worthless, especially after the expenses stint. All she had to do was take the flash drive to Kinko's to print and pick the product up the next day. The final product had to be bound like a book, with high-quality color and paper, because real businesses that many of us wanted jobs from were going to look at them. The day they were due, their group shows up with a 300-page document in black and white and stapled together. The girl apparently lied for a week about printing it. She also apparently tried to get it printed that morning, an hour or two before, at Kinko's, only to be laughed at and turned away. They all got C's, and she failed. The worst part was the presentation of the work to this large company. Apparently, they got blasted for being unprepared and received a lecture about how this wouldn't fly in the real world. This sucked for the other people in the group who worked their backs off to finish the project. Story 36. One group project in high school, we had to do something creative based around a scene from Julius Caesar. I had been looking for an excuse to practice some of my animation skills, so I was super stoked about this. The group I was assigned to was pretty happy. I already had an idea. I wrote the script to make it simpler than doing the whole scene. Started the basic animation for it. I asked the 3 guys in my group if they had any recording equipment because I would need various voices in it. If they didn't, they were welcome to use mine. The 3 of them assured me it would be fine. They had 4 weeks to speak into a mic with words already decided for them. Super simple. So week 4 hits, and it's the weekend before the project is due. I have most of the animation done, but I know I'm going to spend most of the weekend finishing up the animation on the mouths and the color. I get home and listen to the CD with their voices. I met with what sounded like dialogue from a rage comic. Why you trolling us, Brutus? Because you don't deserve my help. LOL, you nerds. I snapped and freaked out. Called them asking why they didn't stick to the script. They said they were trying to be funny, but then got bored and just winged it. I asked them to come over and help me record new dialogue, and they all claimed to be too busy. I ended up having to call some close friends, who couldn't help me until Saturday, and re-recorded everything. I had to postpone the last of the animation until Sunday and was up all night. The only good part was I told the teacher what happened. They each failed the project and I aced it. P.S. This was my senior year. One of the guys who came over Saturday to help voice it was in his 3rd year of college. When the teacher heard his voice, she broke out in a huge smile. Apparently, he slept with her a few times once he got out of the school. I'm glad she apparently had fond memories of it, because that could have ended a lot worse. Story 37. At university, we had to form small groups for a year-long project that involved building actual software for a local business. Our group agreed to have bi-weekly meetings to, discuss progress, ideas, prioritize work. meet with the customer, etc. We nominated one guy, let's call him Carl, to take the minutes of each meeting. He sat in each meeting studiously with a notepad, and we thought nothing more of it. Coming toward the end of the year, when we had to start ramping up progress and review the ideas we'd had over the previous months, we had a meeting and asked Carl to bring out the minutes from all the previous meetings. He pulled out his notepad and read out. The first meeting took 26 minutes. The second meeting took 18 minutes. The third meeting took 22 minutes. Damn it, Carl, you had one job. I can kind of understand why someone might not know what taking minutes meant, but I can't fathom why someone would unquestioningly time and record how long meetings took without ever wondering why they had to do such a bizarre thing. Story 38. Back when I was in high school, I sold pot. I sold a lot of pot. I was never a sketchy wannabe thug. I just loved marijuana, and making money off it was a great idea while in high school. I had a friend who wasn't the smartest man in the world, but he was my buddy. He needed money badly to take his girlfriend out on their 1-year anniversary. So I told him if he drove some stuff for me to another buddy of ours, 2 hours away, I would give him $200. I didn't feel like driving, and I was going to make a lot of money off the flip anyway. So I gave him the weed, and he was on his way. All he had to do was drive it there, get the money, and come back. The guy was a friend of ours, so there was no worry of getting robbed or any hood stuff. I got a call from his girlfriend later saying he was in jail. I asked why, and she told me what happened. My friend was driving when someone rear-ended him at a stoplight. The guy tried to drive off, and my buddy followed him in his car and called the police. The police told him to stop following the guy and to give them the license plate, and they would meet up with him at the gas station to take pictures of the car and for him to file a report. When the cops arrived, they noticed a smell coming out of his trunk and asked him to open it. My friend, being a scared, inexperienced idiot, opened the trunk and the police arrested him for possession of marijuana. He got arrested, and I was out $3,300. We weren't friends after that. Story 39. In grade 9, we went on a field trip that involved rafting down the river for science. This river was basically still water, so it wasn't anything exciting. Anyway, we would stop randomly and collect water samples. They put us in groups of 2 and gave each group 2 beakers. The first time we stopped, my friend was supposed to grab the beaker, get some water, and then put the beaker away. Simple, right? Well, she goes and drops the beaker in the water and loses it. But it was a very shallow stream, so we tried finding it. After a few minutes of not being able to find it, I decided to drop the other beaker in around the same spot she dropped hers, and we would follow downstream. Turns out those things are not easy to see through water. We had to explain to our teacher how we managed to lose both beakers at the first stop. Story 40. I was once working on a group project with my friends in science class, and we decided to make a PowerPoint. We were a fairly large group, so everyone was assigned one job. One of my friends was assigned to do the conclusion, an easy task, since we had already written a longer conclusion on our own to hand in separately. She then called me at 8 o'clock and told me that she had too much other work. Another group member and I wrote the conclusion, and she did nothing. The worst part was when we presented it to the class, she actually tried to read the conclusion that I had written. I cut her off and read the whole thing. She ended up not getting to read anything and looked really stupid. We're still friends now, but we don't work on group projects together anymore. Story 41. First year of college, intro to biology. The first time I had an issue was during a group project involving an E. coli experiment. I had one friend in the group and one dumb girl. We all signed up for a different day of the week to spread the culture in a Petri dish and then place a tablet of triclosan in the middle. The point of the experiment was to get a culture of triclosan-resistant E. coli. My friend and I went in one day and realized that the tablet didn't have any triclosan on it, so we asked the girl about it. She giggled and said it must have slipped her mind. The next week we went in again, and she spread the E. coli on the wrong side of the Petri dish. Needless to say, my friend and I had to write a report to avoid admitting the experiment failed. But seriously, how did she get into college? The second term of intro, I had a new group of people to work with. I thought I had learned my lesson about group work and assigned myself the most out-of-class work. I gave the rest of them easy jobs, like measuring and checking, to see if the automatic light worked. I went in 1 week to check the light, just in case. It hadn't been working for who knows how long, I gave that. Person the simplest task of all, and he still screwed it up. Story 42. I used to run a free arts and crafts program at my local library for urban elementary school kids. Being that he went to Catholic school, my younger brother needed some volunteer service hours for a high school assignment, and I figured I could definitely use extra hands, since there was only one of me and usually about 10 to 15 rambunctious kids covered in paint. Now, I love my brother dearly, but he was not particularly good with arts and crafts or anything involving fine motor skills. I don't know how he passed kindergarten. He could barely use scissors and glue, nor was he experienced with kids. So I decided I'd give him easy jobs. distribute paints and brushes, clean up spills, etc., I needed to go into the staff room for more supplies and asked him to watch the kids for a second. They were all happily making hand puppets at their tables, and it would literally take only 20 seconds for me to come back. What could possibly happen? When I did come back, though, all hell had broken loose. There were kids running everywhere, screaming, paint spills, glitter, covering every conceivable surface. I looked for my brother, and several 8-year-olds were chasing him, yelling threats and trying to cut him with safety scissors. That was the end of his foray into childcare, to say the least. Story 43. Group project during my first year of engineering. We had to design a charger for car batteries that would run off a diesel engine. One guy never even showed up for any of the meetings or replied to a single message we sent. On the day of the presentation, the professor asked where he was, and we told him that he never showed up, and we didn't even know his real name, just his email address and student number. Another group member had to bail out of a couple meetings early to go practice for Coffee Pub that night. Yeah, missing an engineering project to practice. Whatever douchey song you're going to sing at Coffee Pub sounds like a great idea. At the end of the project, we were all supposed to peer evaluate each other using an online form that was only available for a few days. A couple people forgot to do it before the deadline, which somehow was the equivalent of them scoring us all 0 in every category. It brought our project marks way down, and therefore brought our overall course marks way down. It was complete BS. Fortunately, we were able to email the course coordinator and get it sorted out, but it was still incredibly poorly designed. Story 44. First year university chemistry lab, I asked my partner to fill up a beaker with whatever solution we were working with while I got everything else ready. There was a huge tub of it at the front of the lab with its name written in huge letters so you wouldn't mistake it for something else. Anyway, this guy comes back with what I assumed was the solution, so I started doing chemistry stuff with it and the rest of the materials we already had. About 45 minutes later, we realized our experiment was not working at all. Turns out he filled the beaker with water, and we had to restart the whole thing. Story 45. I worked in a small independent bookstore, mostly staffed by aging hippies, burned-out pedants, and the kids who did the grunt work. One of the hippies went off for the summer, and I ended up getting promoted from loafing around with a broom to managing an extensive online catalog, shipping out orders, and doing daily story times in the children's section. So, I had to hire somebody to sweep up and loaf around in my stead. The kid who gets hired comes up to me one day and asks me why the bathroom is covered in crap. I'm like, why is the bathroom covered in crap? I check it out, and sure enough, it's covered in crap. Somebody had taken the key, shat all over the place, and booked it out of there earlier in the day, leaving behind the most awful mess in the goddamn universe. The schadenfreude was intense, but I told him that I'm glad it's not my job to clean that up, and I told him where to find the mop and bucket. He cleans it up, locks the bathroom back up, and returns the key to the register. Days go by and nobody asks for the bathroom key. My desk was about 50 feet from this bathroom, and I can tell you that when the next unfortunate customer cracked that door open, the smell was bad enough to sign your eyebrows off. At point blank, I'm surprised he didn't vomit. The kid dumped bleach and water on the floor and toiled and never soaked it back up, leaving a mildewing pool of human waste and cleaning chemicals to brew for 7 days, creating a cloud of unfathomable vileness that immediately pervaded the entire front end of the store. Story 46. I was in the wedding of my best buddy. I'm standing next to the best man, and as the bride-to-be makes her entrance, he feels for the rings. They're not there. He panics. I'm next to him smiling because this is funny. I'm working my ring off behind my back as a prop because I figured we'd find them later. My other buddy who wasn't in the wedding party is filming the groom because he knows he's going to cry when his wife comes in. We wanted to get it on film because we would laugh at it later. He sees a more interesting story unfolding and is laughing his back off. He knows exactly what is going on, tells his wife, and as everyone is focused on the bride coming down the aisle, she ducks out and finds the rings on the floor where the wedding party was waiting before the ceremony. Head down, she sneaks up to the front and gives the rings to the end guy in the wedding party. We pass them up to the best man covertly throughout the ceremony, and he gets them with time to spare. It was the most memorable wedding I've ever been in, and I laugh my A off every time I see this video. Story 47. I work on helicopters for the Navy, and occasionally we need to crack open the tail to inspect or clean. This is a 6-person job, 1 guy to unscrew the bolt holding the tail straight, 3 guys to hold the fold pole that opens the tail once the bolt is out, 1 guy to spot and communicate, and 1 guy to turn on battery power so the tail rotor doesn't spin wildly in the wind once it's disconnected from the drive shaft. Of course, the idiot forgot to turn on the battery in 40-mile-per-hour winds. Cut to 5 minutes later, the tail rotor is spinning insanely fast. about 3 feet from my head, and an emergency crew is blasting it, and me, with a hose in a vain attempt to slow it down. Story 48. My story's along a slightly different vein because we've all heard or had those group project experiences. I'm a co-social chair for my organization, which is basically a drinking society. The social chairs have $400 to spend on food and beverages, alcoholic and otherwise, for social functions, but not the big parties over the course of the semester. I'm trying to run for a higher elected position in the organization, so I want this semester's social events to go really well. Note that I am in a sorority, take a full course load, and have a part-time job in addition to my responsibilities as social chair. My co-social chair is in a different sorority, but in theory, we both have mad event planning skills. Well, girlfriend wasn't being very helpful or cooperative on our first couple of events, so I decided to divvy up responsibilities. I'd plan all of the semester's events and handle our budget, as well as the unofficial social events that weren't included in our budget. And she would plan Beach Week. Beach Week involves finding a house, signing people up, and dealing with the money. This work needed to be done early, but it would only take a couple of hours of research and emailing in March and then a few phone calls in May. One job. She was supposed to find a house by early March to propose to the society. She came through with a list of Google searches 2 weeks later that were over 2 miles away from where she was supposed to be looking. One job. Unfortunately, the event is probably going to fall through because at this point we've waited too late to plan it. There's still hope, though. I need to get a few more people to sign up by the end of the week. Who being the responsible one? Story 49. I worked at Rite Aid scooping ice cream when I was in high school. It was actually down the street from my high school, so lots of friends would come into the store to get ice cream. Well, instead of charging them 89 cents per ice cream like I was supposed to, I'd charge them 10 cents a cone. This went on for quite a few weeks. Eventually, I got called into the manager's office, and apparently they had a computer program that pulled up all the transactions on my register. It was short by hundreds of dollars and just had pages of 10-cent transactions. Needless to say, I got fired. At least I got to eat a load of ice cream. And so did everyone who came in. Story 50. We had to do a 5-minute report which was assigned at the start of the semester. The professor believed that if you knew the topic very well, you could explain the important parts in under 5 minutes. Now, this guy from our group barely helped, and I knew he was busy with sports and stuff. I think he was varsity football or something. So I decided to give him the conclusion part. That way, if he didn't prepare, he could just repeat whatever we said. The problem was he did not know about the 5-minute rule, even though we were the 9th group reporting, and we specifically had a timer in front of us to let us know how much time we had used. Needless to say, we went over the 5-minute mark, and that was the only bad comment our professor made. We got deducted for that. I guess he felt that he had to say a lot of things to let everyone know he helped. Story 51. I did theater at a high school where theater was taken pretty seriously, and the director had cast a boy who had no idea what he was doing into the ensemble. We had a tech day where we would run certain scenes over and over with costume changes in order to get them timed correctly with the lights. Our scene included a quick costume change, which meant that all of us had costumers to change us in and out of our clothes. It was hectic, but when you were the one being changed, all you did was move your arms and legs accordingly and button things that your costumers missed. This boy only had to change his pants, but he kept missing our cue. Finally, our director assigned him a costumer, who happened to be a girl. We begin the quick change and hear a piercing scream from the wings, and everyone rushes to see what is happening. This boy is staring in horror at his costumer and trying to pull her off while she is trying to tug his pants off in order to get the change done on time. When the director realizes what's happening, she begins to scream, "You have one job. Let her take your pants off and put new pants on. Then walk on stage and stand in the background. That's all you have to do." Story 52. I was sick the day that we picked partners for a Shiatsu group report. I wound up with the girl that never understands anything. You know the type. Doesn't matter what kind of class you're in, math, language, history, anatomy, etc. She doesn't get it, any of it. Every day you're asking, "Why the hell are you here? Who lets you out of the house?" I was hell-bent on getting an A in that class. I really enjoyed it, and the teacher was fair but strict and didn't give high scores casually. I sat with her and managed to find out what parts of the project she seemed comfortable with, and gave her as little as possible to do without making it obvious that's what I was doing. The day arrives to turn it in, and she hasn't cited her sources properly, has missed half of the mandatory requirements, and got one entire part of it totally wrong. I wound up with a B in that class. Never been so pissed. Story 53. My mom was the matron of honor in her best friend's wedding. Her job during the wedding was to bring the rings with her down the aisle and hand them to the couple at the right time. Right time comes, bride goes to hand them over, and my mom's face goes beet red. She had forgotten them in the room where they were changing. It was hilarious. She made a move to go get them, but the bride stopped her and just used her engagement ring instead. My mom has never, ever lived this down. Story 54. I had to do a group project once for bio. I was paired with this girl who was kind of my friend, but we weren't really that close. We had to make a model, label the parts, and then do a bit of research about said parts. We split the research in half, and somehow I ended up doing the model the weekend before it was due. Anyways, on Sunday, the girl sends me the research, and it was friggin' copy-pasted directly from Wikipedia. Footnotes and everything. She didn't even bother to make the sentences make sense. They were just bits and pieces. I said screw that and rewrote her entire thing. And we both got an A for it. Story 55. I was about 9 and my parents took me and my brother on a narrow boat holiday, which is a canal boat on canals. My mom went into the galley for some food, leaving the old man to steer the boat. My brother and I were in the cabin watching TV. The next thing I know, I'm on my back, staring at the roof with all the crockery and stuff raining down on my head. Turns out my dad had gotten bored and lashed the tiller to the rail. The boat had started to veer to the left, or port, and before he could do anything, it had mounted the bank and the towpath. The bow was up in the air and the stern immersed, flooding the engine. We had to wait for 4 hours to get towed to the nearest wharf and dry dock for repairs. Story 56. I'm late to this. Thread, so this will probably get lost, but here goes. My friend worked with racehorses, very expensive animals. We're talking $200,000 plus for a young racehorse. She worked with this girl at a facility in Kentucky, and apparently she was somewhat underqualified and not exactly the brightest star, which would end up really biting them in the A when she was left to tend to one of the young horses that had gotten sick. Well, the horse had both a feeding tube and an IV connector, so they could administer antibiotics easily. Well, this girl messed up big time and accidentally injected yogurt into the IV. Needless to say, the horse died on the spot. Oops! Story 57. I know I'm far too late for this one to be seen, but I'm going to comment anyway. Basically, my cousin, the guy who you cannot trust to do a damn thing. You wouldn't trust this guy to run a bath. Literally, he was asked to run a bath. Fair enough, he goes upstairs and starts to run the bath and somehow managed to kick a pipe off the wall, having water spewing everywhere. Now, any normal person would see the repercussions of this and tell their mom. My cousin, however, decided this was the perfect time to take a dump. About 20 minutes later, the water in there is getting pretty deep and is pissing through the ceiling downstairs. My auntie goes upstairs. And there is my cousin, sitting on the loo, up to his ankles in water in a half-full bath. He didn't even put bubbles in. And to this day, he still insists it wasn't him. So yeah, one job. I have plenty more. Story 58. I was doing a mock public relations campaign for school. There were 3 of us involved. Me, this British guy, and this chick. The British guy and I are both pretty crap at PowerPoint, so we decided that we would do all of the research and type up the report together, leaving the PowerPoint to the girl. All she had to do was basically read through our research and report and make a simple 20-slide PowerPoint. 3 days before the due date, the British guy and I are done with our report, so we send it to the chick to make the PowerPoint. She tells us she wouldn't be free on that day, Friday, so we tell her to just do it the next day. Saturday comes around and she doesn't answer her phone or reply to text messages. We say, screw it. It'll only take an hour to finish. Sunday comes around and she says she'll be done by 9 p.m. Doesn't happen. Multiple calls and messages later, nearing 1 a.m., we realize she might just screw us over. I tell my buddy that I'll just do a quick PowerPoint myself. It took me about an hour, tops. Around 2 a.m., she sends us her PowerPoint, and it's total crap. Random pictures everywhere, yellow text on a yellow-black background, full paragraphs copied and pasted directly from the report instead of bullet points, floral images plastered on every slide like a frigging collage, and for some reason, there was a random image of a pot leaf. I'm pretty sure she doesn't even know what it was. She just wanted to make PowerPoint look nice with images and crap. At the end of the day, we used my PowerPoint instead. I had the pleasure of spending an awkward 5 minutes explaining why we were using my PowerPoint instead of her piece of crap flower collage that apparently took 3 hours to make. Well, at least the British guy and I became good friends because of this incident. P.S. I have images of this monstrosity if you guys are interested. Story 59. About 15 years ago, I was in high school taking a physics class. Class that day had randomly assigned partners for a lab. It was a fairly simple lab. Metal ball bearing, ramp, track, a big fall, and a piece of carbon paper. Using every available measurement, we were supposed to place the carbon paper, which had a bullseye printed on it, on the floor, so that the bearing would hit the center of the target after running down the ramp, across the track, and off the table. My lab partner was a genuine idiot. I did all the math, but the teacher saw me doing all the work and told me I had to give the idiot something to do. So I told him to get me the measurement for the length of the track. I did everything else, measuring the angle of the ramp, the distance from the tabletop to the ground, calculating the velocity of the bearing at the bottom of the ramp, and the arc it would take off the table. Needless to say, he messed that up, so our shot missed the target completely. We got a B, despite my protest to the teacher that if I had done all the work like I had planned, I would have hit within 1 centimeter of the center. The real lesson I learned that day, when forced to do group work with an idiot, give him busy work so that the teacher thinks he's contributing, then do everything yourself so the moron can't hurt your final grade. And no, it's not my job as a student to try to make up for weeks of inattentiveness and years of ineptitude in mathematics. In a single hour of class, the idiot made his own bed, and I will let him sleep in it. Story 60. When I was in firefighter training, I got partnered with a guy who was really sweet but really stupid. As I am small, female, and half of a set of twins, my brother was also in training, we got set aside as examples. Stupid and the girl, basically. So, as examples, we were sent first into a really simple exercise in our first couple of days of training. How to find your way out of a burning building while doing search and rescue. We didn't even have to rescue anything at that point. They put us in a training environment, dark room filled with artificial smoke, in full PPE, all the firefighting gear, including breathing apparatus. Then we were given the one phrase we had to know for the exercise. Smooth, bump, bump goes to the pump. What this means is you follow the hose until you get to a coupling. You feel it. There's a smooth part and a bumpy part. You orient yourself. You get yourself and your partner the F out. We were put in the scenario first because, obviously, since even the girl and her partner would manage, everyone else would see it was quite simple. We get to the hose. I'm following, meaning crawling behind my partner with my left hand on his boot and my right hand on the hose, supporting me. He gets to a coupling and pauses. I say, "Hey, partner, you okay?" Silence, I decided to go for it. This was not something I wanted to mess up. "Hey, partner, smooth bump bump goes to the pump." Because you have to yell really loudly through the facepiece of the breathing apparatus to be heard. He yells back, "Yeah, I got it. We need to turn around. Smooth bump bump." So I let him crawl back around me since he was leading. Keep in mind this whole thing was in pitch dark. We keep crawling. I see a light and something grabs my helmet. The instructor, of course. "Young lady, you just killed you and your partner." He dragged the hose, it was dry, back over to us and handed the coupling to my partner. He grabs it. "Smooth bump bump goes to the pump," he shouts happily and points towards the smooth end as the way out. It was just so simple. He felt the right couplings and pointed in the wrong direction. The sad thing is, that guy's still a firefighter. He passed the class by 1 point. They let him drive fire engines now? I moved out of the country, so I am no longer a firefighter. But I still remember that day. It was just so simple. You feel the damn thing, and you get out. Story 61. This happened 4 days ago. I work in a liquor store. Some women came in and tried to buy wine, announcing, for some reason, that they were already drunk. Because they are dumb and admitted to being drunk, I had to refuse service. Like usual, they complained and argued, and eventually said they'd go get the security guard from the hotel complex's bar next door. Good luck, I thought. He has one job, to get rid of annoying drunk people. Nope. He came in with them, told me to break the law and serve them, and when I refused, he went and got the manager. At least the manager would understand responsible service of alcohol laws, right? Nope. She came and also backed them up. Then told me that if I didn't serve them, she would. They weren't even arguing that it wouldn't be illegal. It would, just that I should do it anyway. The two people who were supposed to protect and help me actually sided with the people causing trouble. I can't imagine what would happen if we ever got held up. I'm thinking about writing a letter to the security company. They had one job. Story 62. About a year ago, we were moving an extremely heavy couch into a third-floor apartment. Our friend, we'll call him Sean, was plastered. We told him, "Sean, your one job is to make sure the door stays open. It doesn't swing shut on its own, so just make sure it doesn't close." When we got the couch up on the third-floor landing, we saw that the door was shut. The door doesn't even close on its own. He had to physically hold it open himself. We woke him up and yelled at him. Turns out he thought that the sounds of us grunting and straining were keeping him from sleeping. One job. Story 63. My buddy and I were out doing a painting job for a neighbor, and we thought it would be okay to just finish it overnight. We are high school boys. Well, we started painting, and I told him to go get more paint for the pan. He went to get the paint, and it was taking him forever. I started to wonder where he had gone. The garage was just a 50-yard walk from the back of the house. I go to the front and find him lying face down in the garage, covered in paint with everything in the garage toppled onto him. Needless to say, I was laughing my head off at the fact that he couldn't even handle a paint bucket. Story 64. In 8th grade, we had something for drama called the improv show. Well, I wrote a ton of scenes that were pretty darn good. Sorry for bragging. And I was in the show a lot. There was this one kid who had absolutely no scenes at all. So I gave him a minor part in one of my scenes because I felt bad for him. He had a month to learn 2 lines. 2 freaking lines. He was supposed to be an announcer for a mock debate or something, and I told him if he needed to, he could write his 2 lines on note cards because he gets nervous easily and kind of cracks under pressure. He told me he was fine. Well, sure enough, we come to the scene, go on stage, and he can't even get the words out of his mouth. He ruined the whole sketch. I felt bad for him, but come on, he had 2 lines. Story 65. I was 17 and my little brother was 14. My parents tend to go to bed around 9 p.m. and could sleep through a buffalo charge, so naturally we tended to do shenanigans after they went to bed. On this particular night, I left our parents' house for a night out with some friends, probably hanging out in a parking lot. Woo! High school. Before I left, I told him not to smoke weed in the house and not to use my vaporizer. I come home to my mother crying at the kitchen table with a vaporizer spout and my little brother on the other side of the table. Apparently, he had smoked the vaporizer in the living room, and my mom had woken up due to the buffalo charge he and his friend were making. I shot him a look of disapproval and later gave him the "you had one frigging job" speech. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.